with your host, Vocab Malone.
What's up, y'all? This is Vocab Malone. If you wonder where I am, now I'm in your screen. I'm chilling with Robert Spencer today on the premiere broadcast of Backpack Radio Live. This is a very exciting show. We're going to be discussing something we wanted to discuss when we were doing the Un-Islamicize Me series. It just never came to fruition, which is the role of women in Islam. Robert Spencer is definitely one of the best people to talk to about that issue. And before we get started, I want to say shout out to everybody who is a Patreon supporter. I just got somebody saying my mic is muffled. All right, what about this? Is this mic better? Hey, I appreciate you guys' comments. You guys keep me honest, keep me clean. What about that? Let me know if the mic has improved. I made a slight adjustment. Hopefully it has. And by the way, keep those comments coming. We'll actually interact with some of your comments as the show progresses here. And let me know if you can hear me now, everybody. You should be able to hear me a little bit better. I fixed the mic. It's better, but still. Oh, you're saying you're saying it's. Well, the music is off now, so we ain't got to worry about that. But I'm very excited today. You guys let me know how I sound as we continue on. But welcome to the very first episode of Backpack Radio Live. I see we got some faithful people up in there. I'm very excited that you are here. Wow, lower the gain in your mic. It's saturated. Wow, okay. We got a lot of... Okay, well, you guys tell me how it sounds as we go on, okay? Now I'm kind of loud. Okay, let me change one other thing then. Okay, guys, I made one other change, everybody. Oh, look! We have a Hebrew Israelite joining us as we discuss Islam. Malachi Israel 2015 says, "You are afraid, vocab." Malachi, if I am afraid, why am I discussing Islam? Just a question. All right. Now, let's get started here. I am very excited to introduce today's guest. We have Robert Spencer in the house. How you doing today, Robert?
I'm all right, but my tie's crooked, vocab. I'm sorry about that.
Your tie's crooked?
I apologize for that at the outset.
Well, now that you said something, I can't think about anything else.
That's right. I know. The whole show will be the Crooked Tie Show.
All right, well, all right, I tell you what, guys. I got a couple people still saying I got a mic issue. I'm going to try something here with the mic, and I'm going to reset it. All right, let me do one thing while we're getting set up. And everybody grab this link while I'm doing that, please. And grab the link, and what I want you to do... Oh, I see what it is. Okay, guys, I think I just fixed the problem. I am sorry about that. Okay, everything should be better now.
Even my tie's better.
Hi, can you prove Islam is a fake religion? Malachi
Easy.
Israel, are you saying that you're a Muslim asking us to prove Islam is fake? That's an odd request.
Easier. Can I do that?
You want to do it real quick before we start? Sure.
Yeah, real quick. Chapter 10, verse 94 and 95 of the Quran tells Muhammad that if he's in doubt about what has been revealed to him, then he should go to those who have been revealed the scriptures before him, that is, the Jews and Christians. And that means that he needs to go to the Torah and the Gospel, as they are referred to, the Taurat and the Injil in the Quran. And so the claim that is current nowadays, that the scriptures of the Jews and Christians have been corrupted by the Jews and Christians, is contradicted by the Quran itself, which refers Muhammad to them. But if they were extant in their uncorrupted form at that time, well, we have manuscripts that go back earlier than that, earlier than the 7th century of the Old Testament and the New Testament, and thus we know that they are the same as what we have now, and thus Muhammad is being referred to the uncorrupted Old Testament and New Testament. They're the same as what we have now, and they show that he is a false prophet because they affirm what he denies, that there is the divinity of Christ, for one thing, in the New Testament, and the crucifixion, the resurrection, and the salvation that is in Christ, basic elements of Christianity that are denied in Islam. And so this indicates that Islam is, even if you're not a Christian, is a false religion because it makes false affirmations, that it claims that it will be affirmed in the Christian scriptures when it is actually denied in the Christian scriptures. So there you go, false religion. You guys can all leave Islam now.
Would you say that's a classic catch-22? How would you describe that conundrum?
Yeah, I guess a catch-22 is it. Yes. It also says, I believe it's chapter 5, verse 64. It says, the Christians will never be rightly guided until they obey what's in the gospel. And so there you go. Well, okay, the gospel says Jesus is the Son of God. The Quran says he isn't. So if the Christians are rightly guided, then they're not going to believe the Quran, as per the Quran.
Amen. Amen. That's one of the best things the Quran says. So, Malachi Israel, you said you're not a Hebrew Israelite, but you're saying, may the Lord of heaven rebuke you, hero, Vocab Malone, and talking about I can't stop the awakening. My guess is you are a Hebrew Israelite, but nonetheless, we're very glad to have you. And don't worry, there will be some shows specifically for you coming up here in due time. All right, so let's look at another way that Islam contradicts Scripture is its view of women. Now, I'm not saying everything in Islam is contradictory to everything in Christianity, but what I am going to say is that when we come to the teaching of the Bible in regards to women, when we come to the teaching of the Quran, and as we look at the Sunnah, the Hadith, all these things that Muhammad said and did, we see contradictions in the understanding of who women are. Now, I'm going to begin actually from the book of Genesis right here. I have the ESV open, and I'm going to briefly show something. And this is something I hope to do almost every Backpack Radio live show, is to open it briefly with a miniature Bible study. So if you don't like that, this is going to be the wrong show for you. But hopefully you do, and I'm excited to show this to you guys, because there's a little golden nugget in here. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Then God said, let us make man in our image. Now, first of all, it is true in this instance that man is a placeholder for man and woman. That is a generic term sometimes used for mankind. And I'm going to demonstrate what I'm saying here as we go on. After our likeness. Now, there's a whole discussion about what the Imago Dei is, but that's not the point of this. So I'm not going to get too deep into the Imago Dei stuff right now. But just know, you can see, even if you didn't fully understand what does it mean, you can see that's a blessed thing, right? To be made in the image and likeness of God. We're not in the image of likeness of dirt or mere animals, but rather in the image and likeness of God. That's significant. And let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on earth. So dominion is a rulership, but this is supposed to be a rulership that's gracious, just like the Lord's rulership is gracious. And so there again you see a distinction between the animals and the people. Because what's it say? And let them. That was the proof, by the way, when it says let make man in our image, after our likeness, let them have dominion. The them in this instance is Adam and Eve. Now obviously applies to the offspring, but here there's something in the image of God that it has to do with a function is what some people call co-regency. So man and woman are ruled together in righteousness in a harmonious relationship that is instituted by God in the creation that he gave them, and yet he places them in charge of it. Beautiful. Now watch this. Verse 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. And here's the kicker that really seals what I was trying to get at earlier. Male and female, he created them. And so notice that it draws it out. There's a little distinction there. Male and female, he created them. Perhaps the image of God is more fully realized when man and woman are working harmoniously together. Because we know that the Bible, of course, uses masculine pronouns for God. But we also know that God, being invisible, does not have physical parts. Nonetheless, it would be inappropriate to call him anything else because of the way Scripture describes him. Father, for example. But nonetheless, as he creates people who do have parts and they come together as one, they're supposed to, it seems as if the image of God is more fully realized in humanity when man and woman are working together in the way that God created them. Again, I reiterate, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. Now, I bring that out because we're going to do a compare contrast, because that's his foundational. This is Genesis. This is the book of Genesis, right? This is foundational to a Christian understanding
of not just women, but men as well. And as we look at what the Quran says about women, you're going to see some stark differences. So before I ask you for a general overview picture of women in Islam, Robert, anything you'd like to comment on the Genesis passage? If not, begin with a general summary of the role of women in Islam. Either way.
One of the main things that you've got there in Genesis is an affirmation of the equality of dignity of every human person. That it's not as if only men are created in the image of God, but Genesis goes out of its way to say that God created men in his own image, male and female. And so we're talking about the equality of dignity of all human beings, that whether you are a man or a woman, as St. Paul says in Galatians 3:28, there's no male or female, you are all one in Christ Jesus. It's the same thing in this passage as well, that there is a fundamental equality between men and women. This doesn't mean that men and women are actually absolutely the same, or can do all the same things in the same way, or anything of that kind, but that they are both of equal worth before God. Now, you have Muslims often claiming that the Quran teaches the same thing, and they will often invoke passages such as chapter 4, verse 1, which says, "O mankind, be careful of your duty to your Lord, who created you from a single soul, and from it created its mate, and from then too has spread abroad a multitude of men and women." Or 49:13.
Robert, real quick, what was that first one? Was that Surah 4:1?
Chapter 4, verse 1.
And these are ones you're saying Muslims give as positive. Just a minute before we go on. Hey, everyone, I want you to look at something in the top of your screen in the middle. You see how there's a box here? In the top of the screen there in the middle, that's actually a timer. And if you notice it's counting down, I want to explain this feature real quick to everyone as this first time watching Backpack Radio Live. That tells us actually how much time we have left in the show. So most of the shows are scheduled to run under or a little bit over an hour. They're always going to float around that 1 hour mark. And so now we have 1 hour and 1 minute and 49 seconds left right now. So just keep a look at that, and that lets you know how much time we have left to go. So continue on with that. You're just saying these are ones they give to try to say positive affirmations about women?
Yeah, to try to say the same thing that the Old Testament and the New Testament are saying. That they are trying to claim, Muslims will often in the West try to claim that the Quran teaches the equality of dignity of women with men. And they will often invoke chapter 4, verse 1, and chapter 49, verse 13. 49:13 says, "O mankind, lo, we have created you male and female, and have made you nations and tribes that you may know one another." So that this never actually says that women are equal to men. It just says that we've created males and females. What is less often mentioned is chapter 4, verse 34, which is also often translated in a misleading manner. I have here Muhammad Marmaduke Pickthall's translation from about 100 years ago. It's a bit irritating because it's written in pseudo King James Bible English, but it's somewhat literal, and it's more literal than quite a lot of other translations. But this chapter 4, verse 34 is one of the passages you will find most often are written in a misleading way in English translations, and it's in particular about the very point we're discussing. Chapter 4, verse 34 starts out by saying men are in charge of women because Allah has made the one of them to excel the other. Now, actually, N.J. Dawood, in his translation, which is the Penguin Quran, it says that that is the Quran published by Penguin, the Penguin Books.
Right.
He says in this passage that Allah has made one of them superior to the other. And that's a bit clearer. What is being said here in the Quran is that men are in charge of women because they are superior to women, whereas Pickthall says because one excels the other. It's the same thing. It's a little bit harder to immediately grasp when you see that he has made one of them to excel the other. But the import of it is that men excel or are superior to women. And that, of course, is the same passage that goes on to say that good women are obedient, guarding in secret what Allah has guarded. As for those from whom you fear rebellion, admonish them and banish them to beds apart, and scourge them or beat them. And so that actually makes it quite clear that in the atmosphere of the Quran is very different from the atmosphere of the Bible. And the idea that God created male and female in his image, and there is no male or female, but they're all one in Christ Jesus, is a very, very different atmosphere from the idea of men being superior to women and beat the women when you fear, not even when they get out of line, but you're just afraid they're going to get out of line.
Right. Robert, you may be surprised to know that recently I came across a feminist female Muslim rapper. Now, you're not going to be able to see this because you're on Skype, but I'm going to show the audience just a 25-second clip since it came up, because there's also people in the chat asking, how do women even get into Islam? And you shared a couple passages that I've actually heard people use that they basically will almost say, like, well, Islam is basically a feminist religion. Like, I've actually heard overstatements like that. I'm sure you have too, of course.
Yeah.
I just want to show people this. You should be able to hear the music. I briefly want to share this because I think people will find this fascinating. So everyone check this out. This is Mona, and the name of the song is Hijab. All right, well, I can't share too much of that, or what will happen is YouTube will give me a copyright strike. So I just shared a little bit of that. But did you hear about power runs so deep, and they're all liberated?
Yeah, this is a lot of hooey. This is a very common thing, though. I have come across that actually in the past, and also many other Muslim women, notably Linda Sarsour, who say that hijab is empowering. Hijab is my choice. Hijab. It actually, what did Dalia Mugahed, who used to be an advisor to Obama, she said it privatizes my sexuality. I don't belong to anyone. I belong to myself, which is, of course, a completely misleading idea of what the hijab is all about. In reality, in Islamic theology, women wear the hijab so that men will not be tempted. There is no idea that men have to control themselves at all. It is entirely up to women to make sure that men control themselves by taking away the source of their temptation. And that's what the hijab is all about. And that's why there are honor killings, because it's the woman's responsibility if a man is tempted anyway. And so the idea that the hijab is empowering is a complete lie that has nothing whatsoever to do with reality. The hijab is actually something that is forced all too often on women, and they are threatened and even killed if they don't wear it. There are many, many, many women who have been, we will never know how many, because if you're in Pakistan and this happens to you, nobody's going to report it. There are many, many women who have been brutalized and killed for not wearing the hijab. It's something that has also happened in the West. Aksa Parvez in Mississauga, Ontario in Canada in 2007 was murdered by her father and brother for not wearing the hijab. And there have been many other women who've been threatened or beaten or even killed for not wearing it. So the idea that this is something empowering to women is really a lie that is designed to foster complacency in the West about what the hijab is all about, and to make people think that it's just fine, it's a woman's choice, like so many other things, and that nobody else should interfere.
Well, do you mind if we look at a couple Quranic passages I throw your way and you give me some commentary?
Sure, boss.
All right. Now, the first one is Surah 2, 228. Now, here's my question. I'll read one of the translations I have, which says, "Women shall have rights similar to the rights against them, according to what is equitable, but men have a degree over them." That's one translation. Now, the reason I'm bringing that up is to get your opinion, to see, because we always want to be fair. Could this be interpreted similar to, say, what you might call a Christian complementarianism, or is it something different because of other background information? Meaning, is this just simply similar to the headship of the husband that a lot of Christians hold, or is there something different going on here? Because we want to be fair as we look at Surah 2:28, because we understand our culture is clueless about gender, so we're not going to try to be unfair to Islam as we look at Christianity, compare it. But what do you think? Surah 2:28.
What you have here is, this is a passage about divorce. And what it is saying in the passage, in as a whole, is that a man can pronounce divorce on a woman just by saying so.
Talak, talak, talak.
Yeah, and see, if you say it twice, this is in 2:229, divorce must be pronounced twice, and then a woman must be retained in honor or released in kindness. That means that if you say it once, then you get mad, and then you can bring her back. But if you say it again, and then you repent, then you can also call her back. But if you say it a third time, and this is in 2:230, if he has divorced her, then she is not lawful unto him thereafter until she's wedded another husband. Then if he, that is the other husband, divorces her, it's no sin for both of them that they come together again if they consider that they are able to observe the limits of Allah. So what this is Islamic divorce law, that a man can divorce a woman at a word. All he has to say to her is, "You are divorced."
So is this known in Islamic jurisprudence as 3 talaqs and you're out?
Yeah.
Instead of 3 strikes, you're out?
Yeah. Because if he says it 3 times, then he can't take her back unless she marries somebody else and he divorces her. And so you actually have in Islam, in some areas, you have actually men who are temporary husbands. We had temporary wives in the Muta in Islamicize Me, and not discussed so much were temporary husbands, who are men who actually marry women who've been divorced 3 times by intemperate husbands who want them back. And so they get them back after they marry this guy and he divorces her.
Or could you call it a Beetlejuice divorce? You say Beetlejuice's name 3 times.
I missed the movie. I'm sorry. I don't get out much.
It's okay. It's old school anyway. Okay, well, thank you for shedding light on that. What about Surah 4:11? And as we read these, everyone, you'll kind of pick up on something, that the Quran is not really narrative driven. The Quran is not really even literary driven in the sense of like driven by poetry or praise. A lot of the Quran is driven by legal rulings and law, from what I can tell. And notice there we are going into divorce law. Now we're about to go into inheritance law in Surah 4:11, where it says, "To the male a portion equal to that of 2 females." Now, didn't they do similar thing in old school Israelite culture? Is that really wrong? Shed some light. Let's be fair.
Well, in the first place, I wanted to go back to 2:28 to 2:30 a bit, just to wrap up, because you were saying, is this similar to the headship of a man in a Christian marriage and so on, and wives obey your husbands, that St. Paul says, and so on, and Ephesians 5:22 and all that, really there's no comparison, because this is an inherently biased, misogynistic system. The idea that you can just divorce women at will, at a word, there's nothing like that in any kind of Christianity at all. And it's the same thing as you're going into 4:11 and this inheritance law. These things are biased against women, designed to put women at a disadvantage. And there is just no parallel to them in any kind of Christianity.
All right, that's good. By the way, shout out to everyone here. Thank you to the moderators holding it down in the live chat. You're the ones who make the live stream possible, because you keep it nice and kosher in there. And I also want to give shout out to all the Patreon supporters who made this broadcast happen. Backpack Radio Live would not be happening without the help of the Patreon supporters, and you guys know who you are. And I saw Elizabeth earlier, and maybe someone else sharing the link to the Patreon. I appreciate that. And of course, if you super chat during the broadcast, I'll give you a shout out, and that's another way you support it. So shout out to you guys. Much love. Let me ask you about this Surah 4:11. To the male a portion equal to that of 2 females. Like I said, could that just be similar to some of the Old Testament inheritance laws? What's the difference when it comes to Islam?
Well, there's no doubt that the Old Testament envisions a situation in which men are superior, and that is not something that carries over to the New Testament, and that's not something that is considered by any sect or understanding of Christianity to be something that is still applicable today. One of the most remarkable things that comes out of Genesis and is brought to full flower in the New Testament is the idea of the equality of dignity of all people. And so the idea that a woman would receive less of an inheritance just because she is a woman in all cases, that is something that has no place in the Christian understanding of things at all, and is, as far as I know, not in contemporary Judaism either. There is an understanding that women have a value before God, just as men have value before God.
Right, and that's why I started real quick with Genesis 1 to set the foundation. Now, we understand that the revelation of what Israel was doing takes place in a certain place and time, and so there's structures that are sort of operative within their cultural framework, but we see the garden state in Genesis 1, but then as we go over to Islam, first of all, we don't have the same discussion of image of God and male and female and all that, but because of the Sunnah concept, maybe I'm not saying exactly right, help me out here, Robert, Muslim rulings and jurisprudence in the 21st century are stuck on a 7th century model, and that's why that's significant, correct?
Yeah, well, it's not that it's considered a 7th century model as far as Muslims are concerned,
right?
Because they think of it as being the perfect and eternal plan of God, plan of Allah. And so it just is what it is. It's not 7th century, it's not 21st century, it's just forever. But yeah, in reality, it is a 7th century idea of the relationship between men and women, which is very male-centric and male-oriented, and consequently at a tremendous disadvantage for women. I think most women who convert to Islam, they have no idea of this. And of course they're not told, because there is so much nonsense being spread about what Islam is all about, and what it teaches in general in order to bring people into it. They have no idea what that these things exist. But yeah, the Quran enshrines a Dark Ages misogyny that has vanished from the rest of the world.
Now, what about this? What about in relationship to court cases? And get 2 witnesses out of your own men, and if there are not 2 men, then a man and 2 women, such as ye choose, for witnesses. Surah 2, 282. Again, notice these are all, I'm talking to the audience, not to you, of course, Robert. These are all in relationship to legalities and jurisprudence. So here we have a case where the woman is she's half of a witness as a man, it seems. What about that?
Well, that's actually, that chapter 2, verse 282 is invoked by Muhammad, excuse me, in a famous hadith when Muhammad says that women are deficient in intelligence. And the women are rather offended to hear this. And they ask him why. And he says, isn't the testimony of 2 women equal to that of 1 man? And they say yes. And he says, well, that's the deficiency in intelligence. So, it's nice that you can write the book and then use it to support your own case.
Isn't it obvious? My book says so.
Yeah.
You know what? That's very interesting. You know what I'm thinking, Robert? I've got this sort of a co-host on the show here. He helps me out from time to time. And sometimes when I'm looking for more resources on material, I go to him. And I'm gonna ask him a question here in a second. But first I'm going to respond to a super chatter. Alex James 2020, thank you. You are the first super chatter. You get extra love being the first super chatter. Shout out to you, making Backpack Radio Live possible for real. And he says, all I can say is thank you. Please keep up the good work. I will support you through Patreon. Thank you, Alex, very much. Well, we couldn't do it without Robert. We couldn't do it without people like Alex. But we also could not do it without asking questions to our good friend here, the Backpack. Backpack, I have a question. Are there any other good resources about the role of women in Islam that we could look at today? What do you think the backpack's going to say? The answer is...
Backpack, magic backpack. I'm the nigga that Mac attack backpack. With a sack, react, I'm like a maniac. I got stacks of facts to keep y'all on track.
Well, look what I found in this trusty backpack here, Robert Spencer. Here's a good book called The Myth of Islamic Tolerance. I think you edited that one. Well, here's another one. The Complete Infidel's Guide to ISIS. Wow! Oh, look, here's another one. The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam and the Crusades. I bet that has some good stuff. Wait a minute, here's another one. The Complete Infidel's Guide to the Quran. Are there any of these that have good information about the role of women in Islam? Well,
Yeah, I think that is if you look at chapter 9 of the Complete Infidel's Guide to the Quran, it's all about what the Quran says about women. A lot of things that we have been discussing just now, that the Quran teaches the inferiority of women. Essentially, they are property of their husbands.
all right, so I'm on chapter 9. I'm in the book that the backpack provided. And I see some really good information. It's called The Quran on Women, Crooked and Inferior. We've already discussed one of them, which is about easy divorce and temporary husbands. We've also discussed the deficiency of a woman's mind, according to, of course, Muhammad. And you have some really helpful sections here where you have the Bible versus the Quran on this issue, kind of what we've been doing a little bit here today. Now, is there any particular sections you'd like me to read out here? Anything you'd like?
One thing you could point out is child marriage.
Okay.
One of the things that is very, very controverted nowadays, and a lot of Islamic apologists in the West will claim that Islam does not sanctify, does not teach child marriage, and you have the idea that Aisha, Muhammad's famous child bride, who was 9 years old when he consummated the marriage, or actually raped her, and he was 54. People say, well, she was really 18, or she was really 21. And if you read the right hadith, you'll see that it's all just fine, and this is all just something that wicked Islamophobes say.
Robert, can I share real quick? You're a professional. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I heard a new one today. I'm sure it's not new to you, but let me tell you about this new one I heard today. Check this out. Aisha exaggerated about her youngness of her age in order to become the most preeminent wife, because then she could say that she'd been married longest time to Muhammad out of any of the other wives. I'd never heard that one before.
That's very good. That's funny. There's no way that it could work, though, because she only lived 9 years with Muhammad. That's also in the same hadiths. And so you got a problem there that he's married to Khadijah for far longer than that, and to others as well. But anyway, they're counting on, as with all Islamic apologetics, they're counting on your ignorance of the whole picture.
Right.
The thing about Aisha is that the idea that Islam, in the first place, it's not just about Aisha. It is about Muhammad being the exemplar. And if Muhammad is the perfect example of all human behavior, then if he marries a child, then it's all right to marry a child. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people will also say, well, in those days, child marriage was taken for granted. And it's true. There's no controversy over his marriage to Aisha. Mm-hmm. There's controversy over his marriage to Zainab, his daughter-in-law. And that's in the Quran. But there's no controversy about Aisha. Everybody took it for granted that it was perfectly okay for a 54-year-old man to be raping a 9-year-old girl. Now, that's a strange culture, but that's the way it was then. Now, the thing is, though, that when you flatten out all of historical development in terms of the rights of women and the understanding of the dignity of the human person, then you're going to end up, and you think that Muhammad is the perfect example for all time, then you're going to end up with people who are raping children now and thinking that this is fine. And that's what we got with Muhammad. In Afghanistan, when the Taliban was toppled in 2003, the aid workers went into the refugee camps. They found half the girls who were second graders were married, And all of the girls who were 3rd grade and above were married.
Whoa. I didn't know that. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Hold on. This is interesting because, so I went to an inner city high school in Columbus, which we talked about before the broadcast. And my high school was known for all the girls being pregnant. So they called it, the nickname of my high school was actually Maternity Ward High. That's not the real name of the high school, obviously. But that's high school.
I taught there in the Bronx, actually, in the 80s.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, I had no idea, though, that happened in Afghanistan. That's terrible. One of the things you might find interesting, Robert, is that Elton Simpson, who, I do not say this as a joke, everyone, tried to kill Robert in 2015, and someone I knew personally. One time when I was sort of debating, talking to him, I brought up injustices done by Islamic republics in the world. And he cut me off. And he said, none of those countries are true Islamic republics. And I said, what do you mean? Yeah. They certainly think they are, and it's in the name, and they're trying to... He said, no, none of them. I was like, well, are there any? Because I thought he was going to say, basically, they're not doing it right because they're doing unjust things. He said, no, there's only one country. I was like, what was it? He was like, Afghanistan before the United States invaded. He was dead serious. That was the only true Sharia...
So they were marrying kids left and right.
Yeah, that's a real shame. So, okay, so continue on. I'm sorry about that.
If you allow me to digress for a moment, it reminds me what you're saying of how I stopped being a leftist. And that was way back when I was in college. And I had a very good friend who was a communist, and she and I did a lot of things together in those days. But I kept on reading and started to study these things, and one day I asked her, Stalin, he killed lots and lots, millions of people, and Mao, he killed millions of people, and it seems like every time there's a communist regime, they kill millions of people. Mm-hmm. And it said, oh, no, none of those were real communists. Real communism has not yet been seen in the world. And I thought, come on, you got to be kidding me. All these people, they say they're communists, they base their societies on communism. Who are you trying to kid? And it's the same thing now with these Sharia apologists, that we have Sharia states in the world: Saudi Arabia, Iran, Pakistan for the most part, Afghanistan, and others. And they try to tell us that these people don't know anything about Islam and they're not really applying Islam. What they really mean is the same thing that my communist friend meant when she told me that none of these people were real communists, that they really find it an uncomfortable example, and so they kind of hope you don't notice. And that's all there is to it. But in any case, the idea of Sharia states not having anything to do with Islam is absurd. Obviously, Saudi Arabia and Iran are exactly what you should look at if you want to see what Sharia is like. They're not ruled by idiots. They're ruled by people who study Sharia. It was Afghanistan where all the girls over 3rd grade age were married. And anyway, they were married in imitation of, I say that in answer to somebody just caught my eye there, but in Afghanistan, they were all married because they were imitating Muhammad. They thought it was okay because Muhammad did it. And that's why Aisha matters. It's not just that it was a 7th century thing and it was okay then. Aisha matters because Muhammad is the example for all time. And so you find, I've got a whole list at Jihad Watch. When there's a child marriage story, I usually republish it, of various modern-day imams saying that it's perfectly okay to marry even a 1-year-old. There's no problem. There's no age limit for marriage.
Hold on, wait. Now, this is just, I thought the general consensus was something when she begins, like, her period. I thought there was...
No, and actually that's why we got into this, because we were talking about the Quran on women. And Aisha and all that is not in the Quran. But what I've been leading up to in a very leisurely and roundabout way, Vocab, is chapter 65, verse 4. And chapter 65, verse 4 is about divorce law. If you look at it, it says, let me get it here.
Quran 65, verse 4. That's how Hebrew Israelites read. Such of your women as have passed the age of monthly courses, for them the prescribed period, if ye have any doubts, is 3 months, and for those who have no courses, it is the same. For those who carry life within their wombs, their period is until they deliver their burdens, and for those who fear Allah, He will maketh their path easy.
Is that Ali?
Yeah. Should I switch to something else?
Yeah.
You got it?
You got?
Why
Yeah, that might work. What does the study Quran say?
I have the study Quran actually. So
Here.
is Ali cheating again?
Yes. He does it a lot.
Man, he does. He lets me down time and time again. I go to a passage and then the person is like, "Hey, is that Ali?"
Yeah. This is Pickthall. As for such of your women who as despair of menstruation, if you doubt, their period shall be 3 months, that is, of waiting before they're divorced. You got to wait and see if she's pregnant. Along with those who have it not. Now here again, he's unclear. The thing about Pickthall is I think he's deliberately unclear, but he's not completely dishonest. And so if you read it closely, if you think about it, he's saying, okay, women who despair of menstruation, they don't menstruate, then you ought to make them wait 3 months before you divorce them. And along with those who have it not. Have what? Menstruation. So he's saying that prepubescent women, you also make wait 3 months before you divorce them.
Okay, I'll read the study Quran just so you can say yay or nay on this translation. As for those of your women who no longer wait menstruation, if you are unsure, then their waiting period is 3 months, as it is for those who are yet to menstruate. But as for those who are pregnant, their term is until they deliver. And whoever reverences God, he will appoint ease for his affair.
Say that again? That was so convoluted.
It was, wasn't it? As for
They
those
deliberately do this. Anyway, as for those, yes, that's the one I want.
women who no longer wait menstruation, if you are unsure, then their waiting period is 3 months, as it is for those who are yet to menstruate. So I think that...
Oh, there you go. There you go. As it is for those who are yet to menstruate. That's girls who haven't had their period yet.
Right.
So in other words, you're marrying a child and divorcing her.
Speaking of periods, I'm sorry, this is weird. I mean, I never thought I'd be talking about this stuff when I got into apologetics. What's the deal with Muhammad talking about his wife's periods all the time in the literature?
Well, it's very important because Islam is so based on cleanliness and uncleanliness, and it is the basis on which women are not supposed to be going to the mosque. Remember, I just actually referred to that hadith where Muhammad says to the women, isn't it true that you are deficient in intelligence? And they say, why? And he says, because a man's testimony is worth twice that of yours. And that's the deficiency in intelligence. But he also says you're deficient in religion. And why are women deficient in religion? Because they can't go to mosque while menstruating. And that's the deficiency in religion. So they're deficient in both intellect and religion. And so Muhammad says they are filling hell. Most of the people in hell are women.
Sid, did he say that the reason why a majority of hell will be filled with women is because of their mental deficiency, or because they can't go to mosque because of their period, or both?
Because they're deficient in intelligence and religion.
So if a woman is menstruating, she's not supposed to go to mosque, even though she's wrapped behind that curtain anyway.
Yeah. She's wrapped behind the curtain because she can't pass in front of a man. That invalidates his prayer.
Okay, does a cat or is it a dog that also invalidates a prayer? It's the dog, right? Does it? Or isn't there something else that invalidates a prayer?
Yes, dog.
Is it only a black dog or
dog.
any dog?
A woman. Any dog.
So a dog or a woman invalidate a Muslim man's prayer if they walk in front while they're praying.
Yeah.
As well as farting, if you can smell it.
Said, you have likened us to dogs. And Muhammad said, yeah.
Wait, that's a hadith?
Yeah.
It's just the gift that keeps on giving. Okay, well... I mean,
Here we go. Narrated Aisha. It is not good that you have made us women equal to dogs and donkeys. And so it's donkeys will also invalidate a prayer.
Oh my goodness. All right, well...
But it has her saying this to him as if she's like scolding him, but there's no answer. He just takes it for granted. Yep, that's what I did.
All right. Well, what about this? Here you've got a section here that's labeled "Divinely Sanctioned Wife Beating," page 170 of this book, which the backpack gave us. Can you talk about divinely sanctioned wife beating? Because again, I'll reiterate an argument I had with a Muslim friend of mine about Surah 4, and he said, "No, you're taking it all wrong. That's just like a light beating, like with a toothbrush or something." And at the time, I thought it was a really strange example until I saw the Muslim toothbrush. I said, actually, that wouldn't be very comfy to beat someone with one of those. But I mean, I don't even think that's really what the Quran is saying. No, anyway, it doesn't give some restriction on it. Does it?
No. The idea comes from a hadith, and the hadith is that Muhammad was brushing his teeth, and some guys come up to him and say, "Hey, what are we supposed to beat our wives with?" And he holds up his miswak, his toothbrush, and says this. And so that's the idea, that you will often hear Islamic apologists in the West say, you're not supposed to hurt her, you're not supposed to leave any marks. It's just by way of warning that you give her a gentle tap to show her that she's out of line.
Fascinating.
Now,
so they ask, what are we supposed to beat our wives with? He holds up his toothbrush. But let me ask you this, and maybe you're about to get to this, maybe I'll jump with the gun. Could a woman turn green from getting beat with a toothbrush? Because wasn't there the woman who turned green?
Yeah. She was all bruised from being beaten by her husband. And Muhammad wouldn't do anything. And Aisha said, "I have never seen women suffer like the believing women suffer." And Aisha also records that she was kind of jealous of him. And after all, he had so many other wives and the sex slaves and everything. And so one night he gets up and he's walking around, and she gets up and follows him out to see where he's going. And he sees her, and she says, "He struck me on the chest, which caused me pain." And I've actually had an Islamic apologist say, "Oh yeah, she means emotional pain. She was hurt that the Prophet was angry with her." But it wasn't that he struck her on the chest with any force, because that would be against the idea that you're not supposed to hurt any woman when you strike her. This is all ridiculous, obvious, transparent, apologetic nonsense.
Oh, man, this is... Again, Robert, you're the guy in my life who's constantly bringing me bad news.
No, that's Muhammad. I just tell you what he said.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about, we mentioned this with the Hijab rap song, and towards the end of your chapter here, you have something that says cover up or else. And can I actually read a little bit of it, and you can cut in? I want to read some of this. This is interesting. In his much-praised June 4, 2009 speech in Cairo, reaching out to the Islamic world, President Barack Obama declared, "I reject the view of some in the West that a woman who chooses to cover her hair is somehow less equal." He also noted that the, quote, "U.S. government has gone to court to protect the right of women and girls to wear the hijab and to punish those who would deny it." Well, that's weird. Punish. I never knew he said that. So, what is the deal with that? And I mean, so what if you want to wear a headscarf? It's like a fashion choice, right? What's the big deal?
Well, like I said, it is in a certain sense. I mean, no sane person should be bothering women for wearing the hijab, and there's a great deal of hysteria in the West about that, but a lot of it's faked. You may recall that after Donald Trump was elected president, there was a very famous case that got international headlines in New York City of a girl who was wearing hijab on the New York City subway, and she was supposedly brutalized and her hijab ripped off by evil Trump supporters wearing Make America Great Again hats. It didn't happen. She later admitted that she lied. There were other stories like that where the people admitted that they lied. And so this is not really something that happens in any large-scale sense, but there is an entire industry devoted to making it seem as if Muslims in the West are subjected to wholesale discrimination and persecution and harassment. And the idea is to intimidate people into thinking they better not talk about jihad terrorism or about the oppression of women in Islam or these other things, because it will make these ignorant, racist, Trump-supporting yahoos attack innocent Muslim women wearing hijab. Really, no. If this ever really happens, of course, there's no justification for it, and the persons who do it should be prosecuted if they've broken any laws. At the same time, though, the people who are much more often brutalized and victimized are women who don't wear hijab when there are men around them who think that they ought to. And they face terrible persecution in Muslim countries. There's a marvelous Iranian-American, Iranian-Syrian writer who now lives in the United States, Majid Rafizadeh. I highly recommend his books. And he writes about how Iranian women are brought up to think that if they don't wear hijab, then Allah will hang them by their hair in hell for all eternity. And this kind of thing, it's used to control and intimidate women. And of course, if they still will go out without it, then they can get brutalized by the religious police in Iran. So that's the real oppression. But Barack Obama didn't say a word about that in Cairo in 2009.
Right. Shout out to JMD Apologetics. Everybody go to JMD Apologetics, subscribe to his channels. He's got a lot of great interviews he does with different guests, and he is also super chatting, and he says, "Hey Vocab and Robert, keep up the great work." Thank you for super chatting, JMD. Much love to you. And thank you also, Kaza Marine, one of my mods who is sharing the Patreon page. I appreciate you guys a lot. Now, you mentioned a women's rights activist. There's another one you have in your book named Phyllis Chesler, and she notes that in Algeria, as in Iran, unveiled, educated, independent Algerian women have been seen as military targets and increasingly shot on sight. And then you talk about in February 2007, Zilla Huma Usman, the Pakistani government's minister for social warfare in the Punjab province, was shot dead by a Muslim because her head was uncovered. And the murderer, Mohammed Sarwar, declared, quote, "I have no regrets. I just obeyed Allah's commandment. I will kill all those women who do not follow the right path if I am freed again," end quote. What's the deal with that? Do these guys see it as their responsibility? I mean,
it's not only the responsibility, they think that they're being righteous. They think they're doing something that will get them the blessings of Allah because they are carrying out His law. These women are transgressing against the law of Allah. They have to be punished.
Oh, man.
The thing is, that in Islam, in Christianity, vengeance is mine, says the Lord. As St. Paul quotes, the idea is that God will take care of these things. But in Islam, it's a very different situation. The Muslims are the executors of the wrath of Allah. Chapter 9, verse 14 and 15. This is a very important passage. It says, "Fight them. Allah will punish them by your hands." So you have to fight against the enemies of Allah, and Allah will punish them through you. So when a guy kills a woman because she's not wearing hijab, he thinks Allah is punishing her through him, and that he will be blessed as a result.
Is that where the Sharia patrols come in London?
Yep.
Can you briefly talk about those, especially in relationship to women? Everybody may not know about those.
Yeah, this is something that is increasingly common in the West. They were, as you say, in London a few years back, and they were also in Germany, I believe in Cologne, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure I remember that correctly. In any case, they were in a city in Germany, and a German court, although this was later struck down, actually ruled that they were okay and that they could operate. And what they do is they go up to women who are not wearing a headscarf, and they tell them that they should wear a headscarf or they're going to have trouble. They harass people who are walking around, which you can do in Europe, with alcoholic beverages. They, in essence, they enforce Sharia on the streets of the city where they're operating.
There's some videos of this on YouTube, I believe, still, where you can see this type of thing happening.
Yes, indeed. And there were some people who were involved in terrorist activity who were part of these Sharia patrols, and so they were jailed. The Sharia patrols were stopped in London, but I expect they'll be back eventually.
Mary Ann H. in the super chat. Thank you so much, Mary Ann. Thank you very much. She says, "Loved Islamicize me. Robert had that evil laugh down." Well, you know what? Since you super chatted and since you said that, Mary Ann, I think that means we need to have a little bit of Robert Spencer in our lives, everybody.
Yes, yes.
Hold on, there's a little bit more coming. Hold on, Robert. They're fixing your tie. You're always talking about your crooked tie here.
Yeah, my tie is terrible today. I apologize, ladies and gentlemen.
Here it comes. This is good. It's going to get stronger, Robert.
Yikes.
You're going to love it. We're going to play this the whole rest of the show. Okay, here we go. Here's the big one, everyone. Get ready.
Oh, dear.
It makes me want to laugh, too. right, Rox B has a question, and I think a lot of people have a question about this. Is that Robert's normal laugh, or did he actually have a fake evil laugh? Everyone wants to know, how did this happen? Because you're like a natural.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm sorry. That's pretty much the real thing.
So if someone tells a funny joke and you get going, you'll laugh like that in real life?
Yep.
That's contagious, though. I mean, look at these comments. Robert has an awesome laugh. It just works perfect. And Jihad Jr. was so convincing of being terrified of Robert Spencer. It's on video, so he can never escape it. Boycott Halal USA says. Cosmarine says, this is contagious. People, I'm telling you, we had no idea you would be so good. But thanks for being a good sport. Let's stop right there, because I've done stuff in interviews that probably no one else could get away with, so I appreciate that. So we'll take a little pause right here. Let's talk about your new book. Let's make sure, I want people to know about this book. This book, in a lot of ways, I've heard you say, is maybe the most important book you've written. Definitely one of the longest.
This is it.
Let's talk about this book. We're going to talk about women in a little bit. We'll kind of summarize. But let's talk about this book, The History of Jihad.
Yeah, The History of Jihad from Muhammad to ISIS. It's the first and only comprehensive history of jihad. That is, I read years ago a book called Jihad by Paul Fregosi. It's a very good book, but it only covers the jihad against Europe. And I cover the jihad against Europe, I would respectfully say, in greater detail than that book in this one. And also the jihad against India and in Africa and elsewhere, tying it all together in a way that has never been done before, so that you see how the jihad against Israel and 9/11 and all these things all come from the same source and go back to the beginning of Islam. So I think really this book, it completes everything I've been trying to do all these years. I showed in the book we discussed earlier, The Complete Infidel's Guide to the Quran, that there's a lot of problematic passages in the Quran. I showed in The Truth About Muhammad, my biography of Muhammad, that there are a lot of difficulties in the career of Muhammad that are problematic for today. And now in The History of Jihad, I explode a lot of historical myths, that there was some kind of time of tolerance, or that Muslims didn't really take these passages seriously. A lot of people told me in the Quran book, well, you're just finding all these dusty, out-of-the-way passages that nobody takes seriously anymore. You could do the same thing with the Old Testament. Well, this book proves that not to be the case. It shows that Muslims have taken these passages seriously all through history and all through time, everywhere they have gone. Everywhere that Muslims have been living with non-Muslims or come to find non-Muslims, so now it's the same thing, that there's always conflict, and there's conflict today. We're not going to escape it. It's the same that it's always been everywhere. And this book, The History of Jihad, it proves that.
So what was the official release date of this book?
It is not yet out. It's be out August 7th. I am checking by the mailbox every day because my copies are supposed to come any day now. The publisher said late June, early July, and here we are, July 3rd, and they're not here yet.
You're waiting on your own book. Yeah, so that's exciting to hear. So people can go on Amazon and pre-order it.
Yes, that's right. Yes, and order 5 copies for your friends. Really, I wish I could give them away. I'm not trying to get rich here. I'm trying to tell people something that I think has not been told. This is a book that contains material that people do not know in the West, and I think would make a big difference to public policy in a great many ways if they were known in the West.
Especially if they took the historical, if they took the facts seriously, because they kind of just stand there on their own, and it's you got to learn from history. But Robert, I commend you. Your writing output is prodigious. I mean, I look at all the books you have; it's amazing, and some are very lay level. They're always clear, I'll say that, but they're always very systematic. You organize them well. Every book you have is just chock full of information. And I'll be honest with you, when I first met you and we did these interviews, I would go hunt down as much as I could every time you would drop a fact, a news story, and I would almost be thinking he's got to have this wrong because that doesn't sound right. You just had so much bad news all the time.
Yeah, this is the problem. None of this sounds right.
I didn't want it to be true. And I tracked all this stuff down you had mentioned. And first of all, I would always think, why haven't I heard of this before? Number one. And then number two, this can't be true. This sounds too messed up. And then thirdly, I found out you were always right. I'm not saying you're always right, but every time you've got a fact in a book, it is truly a fact. You're very careful in your research.
Yes, thank you. That's true.
And so
this book is based on the history of jihad is based on entirely on eyewitness accounts and accounts from contemporary chroniclers, historians who were there or close to the events. And so it's how people saw these things at the time they were happening.
Right. Well, so anything else you want to say about the book? I want to transition briefly. We're winding down here to kind of give a summary picture of the view of women in Islam, and maybe you could shed some light on the psychology of it all, because some people think, well, why are there any women in Islam? But before you do that, super shout out to Tony Tabano. That's my fellow Paisan chilling out there in Providence, Rhode Island. My man with the super duper chat. Tony, check it out. Any comments you want to say? Now's your chance, because if I see it, I'll definitely repeat it, because you get much love, man. I do appreciate you, bro. And it's exciting to see you in the chat, man. Tony's a good guy. So what's the sort of a summary statement of women in Islam? We didn't even cover everything. There's stuff in the Hadith, I didn't bring up, like about women being bad omens and harmful to men, and they can't wear wigs, and just all kinds of stuff. Didn't even get into. But what's a good summary picture statement? And then why are women in Islam then? Let's talk about that.
Well, in Islam, women are essentially commodities, possessions of the men in their lives, and they're designed to serve them, and that's all there is to it. Beginning and end of story. Now, why would any woman be in this? Well, if you're born in it, and it's your life, it's your family, it's your friends, it's your social group, and if you question it, then you're going to be cast out of all those things and maybe lose your life, then you're not going to be likely to want to leave. And you do have many people who are in that kind of situation. They are miserable, they know that their lives are miserable, but they don't have a choice. They do not see any way out, and there really is no way out. Maybe if, when we went into Iraq and Afghanistan, that is the U.S. troops, after 9/11, maybe if they had, the Americans had said, if you're a woman who's being beaten and you want to get out of your situation, we will give you refuge, things like that, maybe things would be different. But there's really nobody standing up for these women. There's nobody who really can say that they are doing anything to prevent this oppression from going on, and so they have no recourse. That is what's going on, really. That's the situation. And so they, of course they don't leave, because they've got nowhere to go. Now, when it comes to Western women who convert to Islam, that's a very different psychological situation, and I think that in many cases they are reacting, and perhaps overreacting, to the rootlessness and meaninglessness of materialism and life in the West, where you're supposed to have a career and that's supposed to be the fulfilling thing in your life, and then you find that it isn't, and where do you go? What do you do? And so I think that a lot of women, they think that they need to fit themselves into a familial and social structure, and it might not be available to them or appealing to them in their own environment, and they look for it in Islam, and they might mistake the oppression of women in Islam for a woman taking her natural place in a natural and healthy societal structure. So a lot of it is a reaction to that. I remember reading several stories about Latin American women who converted to Islam, and they all would say that the Latin American men were nasty to them and were always coming on to them and always treating them like sexual objects, and they felt respected when they wore the hijab. And so obviously I think that they're going to end up being disrespected more than they ever imagined, but they don't see that in the heat of the moment as they're reacting to the already problematic situation that they're in.
Right. Well, there's challenges with women's issues globally. Briefly, can you do this one? Because we really are writing down. A lot of people don't understand the origin of this, and they don't understand also how intrinsic or not is it to true Islamic practice. What I mean by that is female circumcision, which is really, of course, female genital mutilation by force. Talk about that.
Yeah. There's so much lying about that. There's so much misinformation about that. Even people who are against it, even people who are crusading against it often lie about it and say this has nothing to do with Islam and it's just a cultural practice in particularly East Africa. This is completely false. If you search in the female genital mutilation category at my website, Jihad Watch, you will find that it's practiced widely in places like Iraq, Iran, Indonesia, that have nothing to do with East Africa. And it's not that it is a cultural practice, it's an Islamic practice. Because Muhammad told women, said that circumcision was an honor for men and for women. And there's a hadith in which he's passing by a woman who is performing it, and he says, don't cut severely. Well, that's of course a subjective judgment. He's saying that it's okay to cut, that it should be done. And in the teachings of the various schools of jurisprudence, there are some that say it's obligatory for women, and some that say it's good for women, but it's not required. But there are none that forbid it. And so it's very widely practiced. It's justified by Muhammad in hadiths, and this is why it happens.
Yeah, I have heard Muslim apologists say, oh, that's not an Islamic problem. That's an African problem. That's the way.
Yeah, it's not. And in that case, then why is it so widespread outside of Africa and always in Muslim countries? And people will also say that, oh, yes, but non-Muslims do it too. And yet, wherever there are non-Muslims who are practicing it, notably in Egypt, it's in countries where they are in close proximity to a large Muslim majority. Right. And so clearly they're influenced by the larger culture. But there's no justification for it in the teachings of any other religion.
You know, this whole conversation really is moot because I have proof that women are totally equal in Islamic societies. They can drive now in Saudi Arabia, Robert, don't you know?
Oh, yeah. So everything's okay. They still need permission to go out from a male, their father or brother or husband. But, yeah, they can drive now when they get that permission. So
right.
All is well.
So what he's referring to, everyone, is essentially what's a permission slip that a Muslim woman has to have to go out. And in pre-9/11 Afghanistan, I heard a lot of instances, maybe it still happens, I just don't know as much, where women could be scourged in the streets if they couldn't produce the proper paperwork that said they were allowed to be out and about. So you're saying in Saudi they still need that?
That's wild, yeah. That's a wild thing. It reminds me of something recently. I took a little time off and did some tourism. And I went around in Washington, D.C., and saw the Capitol, sat in the Senate galleries, a lot of things like that. And I also went down to Richmond, Virginia, and went to the Confederate White House. And in the Confederate White House, they showed us a pass that Jefferson Davis had written to for his slave Henry to give him permission to walk the streets. It said he had permission to go to the apothecary, that is the pharmacy.
Okay.
And come right back. And so it was dated and signed by Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy. And so the idea was that Henry, if he is approached by police or anybody, he produces this pass. Mm-hmm. And if he's anywhere else but the apothecary or the White House or in between them, then he's going to be in trouble. And so this is because you have a slave and you're trying to keep control of the slave. So you have the slave has a pass, that's where he can go and where he has to get back to and what date this is happening. Now, women, it's exactly the same situation. They're essentially slaves. And so a woman in Saudi Arabia, she has to have permission to go out. And it's not just Saudi Arabia. Even if it's not enforced in other areas, this is Islamic law. A woman has to have permission from her husband to go out anywhere. And if she has, and then you're talking about these passes that work exactly the same way as the slave passes in the Old South, that they were designed to keep control over the enslaved person. And that's what we're dealing with when we're talking about women in Islam.
Right. Yeah, so it's not so enlightened. I mean, it's essentially like what America South had during the time of slavery. Well, about the book, a couple people want to know where to get it besides Amazon. And
yeah, it's at barnesandnoble.com as well. The History of Jihad. You can pre-order it at barnesandnoble.com, bn.com.
Okay, excellent. Carol wants to know a little bit more about the driving. How much do you know about the specific regulations going on in Saudi? Do you know much about the driving situation?
Well, women, it's really pretty straightforward. Women are taking driver's tests and getting driver's licenses. It's part of the modernization program of the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. And Mohammed bin Salman has assured people that he's not going to do anything that's against Islam. And certainly with women driving in other Sharia states such as Iran, it's hard for Saudi to make the case that women can't drive. All he's trying to do is make Saudi Arabia more attractive to foreign investment and to strengthen the attachment of the United States with Saudi Arabia, where Trump is justifiably suspicious of the Saudis. But the Crown Prince needs us against Iran, and that's why this is all happening.
So this is something that probably, well, why am I saying probably, would raise the further ire and anger of what are sometimes called Wahhabists, but I think we would maybe just say Salafis especially. It would make them more upset because they're already sort of upset with Saudi because Saudi is not a totally Sharia compliant country, even though you can't own a Bible there. It's still not totally Sharia compliant, and this is probably something that would make them even more angry, I guess.
Yeah, and there's a lot of anger among the Wahhabi hardliners in Saudi Arabia against the Crown Prince because of all these things. And so he disappeared a while ago.
Oh, really?
He didn't appear in public for a good while. And
was that just because he didn't want to get hit by the new women drivers? Just kidding. It's because they're new. Everyone, not because they're women. It's just.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, he a lot of people were saying, "Oh, he must be dead. He must have been killed by the Wahhabis." And then he reappeared, but there's no doubt that he's under threat. And it's not that he's such a great guy. He's not really doing any real reform. But what he's doing is too much for the Wahhabis already.
Right. So Ken has a great question. Do they make the driving test half as hard for the women? Since according to Muhammad, everyone, not according to us, just so everyone's clear, they're mentally deficient by half at least. I just wonder if they follow through and make it easier. I don't know.
To the best of my knowledge, no, but that's funny. They ought to, really.
Yeah, if they're going to be consistent. I hope everyone understands we're making jokes about a rather serious issue, and we understand it's serious. Now listen, guys. There's so much more that we could discuss in relationship to Christian doctrine and women, such as Ephesians chapter 5. Let me just read a few verses from that as we sign off here. Everybody, check this out. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself a splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Now ultimately, we're all sinners and all need the gospel, and that's the message that I hope, especially the ladies in the audience, would bring to any Muslim women they would meet. But there's an additional attraction of the benefits of the gospel. And one of those benefits is that we are taught truth about human relationships because we get the vertical relationship right too. And I just think that's a beautiful message she brought out. Robert Spencer, final words from you.
Vocab, it's a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for standing for the truth, telling the truth. Say hello to David, who I just saw show up in the comments here. And it's good to see you all. I am ready for the sequel whenever you're ready to film it.
All right. Well, everyone, I'll stick around on the live chat a little bit and talk to you afterwards. Again, thanks to the Patreon and the Super Chatters. And Robert Spencer, we wish you great success on the new book. I'd love to talk to you when it comes out. And thank you very much for joining me on the premiere broadcast of Backpack Radio Live. Everyone, we will be back Thursday night Backpack Radio Live, second broadcast at 11:30 East Coast time. And myself and my friend Abu Kamer are going to be talking about the differences between Islam and the Nation of Islam, and the difference between Black Hebrew Israelites and the Nation of Islam. And after we briefly talk about that, we're going to be taking your questions in the live chat. It's a live Q&A. Do not miss it. So again, thank you, Robert Spencer. You did awesome, as usual.
Thanks. See you later.
Now we got to end the broadcast with a stare. Robert left before we could do it, though. It's a crying shame.